Today, we are talking about selling your business to your employees. Why would you consider doing it? Is it a good thing? My guest today is Cameron Madill, and I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and every week I get to talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies. On this show, we've had Netflix, we've had Kinko's, we've had YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable. Check out the archives, lots of great episodes there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You Podcast and content marketing. And you can go to rise25.com and learn all about what we do. All right, today's guest is Cameron Madill. He's the founder of PixelSpoke. It's an employee-owned web design and marketing agency. They specialize in credit unions. We're going to talk about how they eventually decided to focus on that market. He had about 20 years from the founding of the business to running the business, CEO, and then selling the business back to his employees. And we're going to talk to him about how he did that, why he did that, some of the benefits, the pros and cons of going through that. Now he's got a new business. He's really focused on helping other businesses to grow. And he also started a business helping others using the Gottman method. So helping other entrepreneurial couples. And we'll talk about what the work that he's doing now. Cameron, it's so great to have you here today. And I love to hear stories about what people were like as a kid, and especially any entrepreneurial stories that they had. And you had a candy resale operation in third grade. When I was third grade, I was, I think, playing soccer, and that was about it. But you were actually going down the block, getting this candy and reselling it to your classmates. Tell me how you came about that idea.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. The candy story. So it was actually I can't remember where I even remember this because I buried it, in the deep recesses of my memory, and it might have been an entrepreneurs organization event. And I realized, I kind of have been an entrepreneur my whole life. So the story goes, I liked candy, nothing unusual about that. At some point I saved up a little more money. I bought a little bit more candy, and I was hanging out at my elementary school, which was about 2 blocks from this convenience store. And someone saw my, bag of M&Ms or whatever it was, and they said, dude, where'd you get that? And, and I don't know what I said. And then they said, I'll give you $1 for it. And, I had paid 50 cents for it. And at that moment, an idea was born. So for probably about a month, I would buy, $5, $10 worth of candy, and I could mark it up 100% just by bringing it into school. And my thriving business brought me a lot of joy, made me a lot of friends, until I got busted by one of my close friends' mom. She was driving home and she offered me a ride, and I was taking the quote unquote wrong route. And she ratted me out to my parents, and that was the end of my first venture, but I learned a lot.
So your parents shut you down. It wasn't a principal or anything like that.
No, it never got to, they just, they shut me down.
That's interesting because you end up starting this business with your father. So you go to Stanford, you study physics, incredibly competitive program there, a little bit of computer science, I understand as well. And naturally, just total linear trajectory from physics to starting a web design agency. Makes sense, right? This is 2000. This is 2003. So you're in the Bay Area. I mean, it's the thing that people do, right? So what inspired that?
I like to think of it as a really uninspiring story. I was all over the place. I also had a degree in history. I had stopped out for 2 years to play music. I lived in Cuba for a while, and I was kind of eating at the buffet of life. And I got to my senior year, and it was like, oh crap, everyone had plans and clarity, and I didn't. And after kind of looking at all these options, getting a PhD, maybe going into finance, maybe going to a Bay Area tech company, working for a nonprofit, like it was anything you could think of. I finally just thought about it, and I said, I'd rather just do something for myself and learn from my own mistakes, rather than I've never liked having a boss. And so it was kind of just this intuitive, I think I would rather just not work for anyone and work for myself. And then it was kind of like, well, what can I do? I had no skills. I had no money. And like you said, it was kind of like it was in the Bay Area. There was a lot of tech around. And I thought, this website thing, I bet I can teach myself how to do that. So that was I still joke with some of my employees, like our story of origin was I didn't want to have a boss, and that's why we exist today.
And so you dabbled in a little bit of computer science, so you knew you had an aptitude for it.
Yeah, I mean, I knew obviously, I knew I was smart. I knew I could teach myself stuff, and I already had a laptop, and so I just figured how hard can it be? And the answer is it was a lot harder than I thought, but I was at least technically proficient in that area.
And why did you start it with your father? And was he technically proficient, or what did he bring to the table?
Yeah, long story. I'll make it short. And also I'm getting over a cold, so I sound like
Okay.
a intense 30-year smoker. So my dad was working actually for IBM at the time. He was a senior vice president or whatever. So he had a long, pretty successful tech career. But I think I can say this now, he hated IBM. They had bought the company he was working at, which was kind of his dream job. Instead of being able to walk to work, he was now driving out to the suburbs. And so he was just burnt out, and he was kind of, and my parents are very frugal people. So they were really, they were at a point where they were financially ready to retire anyway. And I think I was just kind of like, hey, wouldn't that be fun? He's got all this experience in business and tech, and we'll team up. And I didn't even know any of the words. I didn't know about marketing or HR or sales. None of those words meant anything to me. But I just knew, like, hey, if you've been a senior executive at IBM, surely, you could help to do this. And he was, I think he was pretty burnt out at first, but he was excited about the opportunity to work together. And it was really an absolute once in a lifetime experience. We weren't really like a super high functioning team because I was so inexperienced and we didn't really get clarity on kind of what we each wanted. But I think we had a lot of fun together. And I will say, starting a business, especially if you know what you're doing, having someone in there in the trenches with you who you really know and love and trust. I mean, my dad just always had my back and I always had his, and that alone, I think, just gave us a lot of security and just ability to stick it through the hard times.
Yeah, and I would think that would also help with one of the hardest parts of growing a business, which is hiring, knowing when to hire, who to hire. Did you find that having your father there, who had many more years of experience than you, that was helpful in that area?
Uh, no, I didn't. So the funny thing
Okay.
about my dad is, for the first chunk where I'd work together, I'd tell people, oh, I work with my dad, and they kind of be like, oh yeah, you work at your daddy's company. I was like, no, we started it together. And they'd be like, yeah, right. But, you're just kind of riding on your dad's coattails. And my dad, very talented, brilliant guy, but he had done it all. Like he had done all the big fancy jobs, right? He had all that stuff. He had 2 assistants. Like he had flown all over the world. And he just wanted to code. Like that was the thing he never really got to do in his career because he got promoted out of those roles so fast because he was a really good coder and he had people skills, right? So that's like your perfect technical manager.
Peter Prince will get promoted to level of your incompetence, right?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully he didn't get to his incompetence level, but he got promoted.
Yeah.
So the itch he wanted to scratch, and I didn't have enough savvy to really know this, was he just wanted to code. He wanted to just like build interesting things. And he would always offer his opinion when he was asked, and there was always a lot of wisdom there, but he really was never engaged on the business side of things. He just wanted to be a coder. So, man, we made a lot of really bad decisions. I'll leave it at that. There was a lot of, there's a lot of those things where it's like, eventually I looked back and I was like, yeah, that's why experienced people do things differently, but that's what you do when you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, now you help guide younger businesses. You've helped guide younger businesses. And so what would you say if you were to go back and give your younger self advice? What should a younger you have done starting a business with your father, assuming you're still going to start the business with the father? What advice would you give to that person to get clear about what the roles are and, how you're going to organize the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's things you'll hear from other people, but related to my passion for couples work, couples therapy. On some levels, it's all about figuring out what are your values and what are your core needs. And I think if I could have figured that out, my dad would have said, my core need is I want to do interesting programming work. He didn't have any need to sell things or build strategies or be a mentor. Like none of that. His core need was to sit at his computer and do interesting, hard coding projects. And I think I could have gotten more clear on my core needs. And I always think of that as the starting point because if you can align those in any context, in any relationship, that's the basis for a win-win relationship. The other advice I'd give myself, which on many levels this is a good quality, but as I mentioned, I come from a very frugal family, and I tend to be pretty frugal myself. And I wish I would have been more comfortable just spending money to get clients to learn faster. There just were so many mistakes I had to make to learn, but I had periods where in the early years I was just sitting around doing nothing because I couldn't figure out how to market and sell. I was too, insecure, uncomfortable, unskilled, you name it. And I wish I would have just dumped like $500 a month into AdWords, which I think would have been so stressful since we were barely making any money. But I just think we could have like shortened the learning cycle. And I think that's what it's all about in the early days. I mean, my biggest belief out of on my whole 20-year journey is, as a business, like our number one job is to find a business model. You can have a great business model and be bad at everything else. You can be a drug dealer, whatever, and you're going to make a lot of money. And if you have everything done right in your business, but a terrible business model, you're going to really struggle. And I think that kind of I just think I wasn't clear on that.
So true. So you started the company around 2003. By 2009, you were doing about 2/3 custom software, about 1/3 websites. As you mentioned, your dad loves coding. You're really good at computer science. And unfortunately, the phone stopped ringing. And around the same time, you also decided that you're going to move away from the custom software because it changes in the model. It changes in the business market at that time. So take us through how you came to all those realizations.
Yes, deep psychological pain. Yeah, I mean, 2009 was a really, painful, kind of humiliating time for me, and I think, but also really powerful. So I think I got clarity that my dad and I, as much as I love him and as smart and talented as he is, that we weren't a good business partnership. It goes back, we had really different core needs.
Well, the big age difference too, that makes a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So for him, upside had no appeal, and any risk was unacceptable because he had basically set himself up. So as I really came face to face with that, I was really terrified. We have a really close family that, we all know these families where it's like, oh, like the Johnsons, they're so nice. How come they don't talk to each other anymore? Oh, that's right. That thing with money. So I was really nervous, but it just got bad enough that I felt like I had to have the conversation. And I had this intuitive realization that he really just wanted to be an employee. He didn't want all the stress. He didn't want to think about strategy. He didn't want upside. He wanted predictable income. So, I approached him, and, he's an amazing person. He actually handled it really well, just kind of thought about it and said, yeah, I sort of figured this would happen someday. And it was as smooth as could be, but it was really intense emotionally. There was a lot of fear around that. And then I think as I got through that, I just got to, I had my ego said, I should be on the cover of Inc. magazine. I should be leading a venture funded capital, company. But as I really started kind of looking in the mirror, being forced to from the circumstances, I realized, well, you know what? If you want to lead a venture funded capital like company, move to the Bay Area, join those circles, build that kind of company. And if you don't, you have 10 people back there who are scared. They're counting on you to bring in business and create a direction through this really scary economic climate. And so I really kind of owned my role. I think it was the first time I ever really understood the difference between leadership and management. And so I really started to own leading the team I had versus the team I thought I should have in my head. And part of that was realizing like, well, how can I be a leader if I'm not passionate about what we do? And I just really did not like the custom software. We were pretty darn good at it. We had a lot of talent. There's a lot more to be good at custom software than just being able to code. But we were able to code really hard things. But just the jokes, and I feel like I have a lot of peers in this area of, someone comes to who's got a bunch of money because they're a trust fund kid or they sold their company and now they want to build an app, or they want to build Facebook for dog owners or whatever it is. And they were just all terrible ideas, impossible to scope, and just, but big money temporarily. And so I just felt like this is like drugs. We ought to just get off it and focus on websites, which we can do in a really, consistent. We can bound them. We can consistently make the clients happy.
More clear scope, more repetitive process in a good way.
Exactly. Build a process, et cetera. So I'm just going to go all in on that. I guess that was the first time I did this. We're going to talk about the second time as well, but I just said, we're going to go all in on this and like, damn the torpedoes. If we go down, at least we will have learned something and we'll have done it like, doing what I want to do versus what I'm, basically acting out of like maybe passion and conviction versus fear.
Yeah. And your dad actually kept on working for you. So after you dissolved the partnership, he continued working with you for another 8 years after that. How was the relationship at that point when you're no longer partners?
Yeah, it was really awesome. I mean, I think, like I said, we're a close family. He's just a really like a gem of a human being. And I think, it was a mostly younger company, people in their 20s and 30s. And so to have this guy in his 60s there who just
coding in the back.
Yeah, exactly. And he's just, he's a funny guy. He's a smart guy. He says some really quirky things. I mean, he kind of has that like I should say at that time, that kind of like end of career, just didn't really give a damn. So we were all kind of like trying to be professional and growing in our careers. And he was just himself. And I think he really was very influential in our culture. And I think we loved having him around. And he kind of went down to 4 days a week and then 3. And yeah, I just saw the photos the other day of his retirement party in 2017. It was working with my dad for a decade was really a unique and always an experience I'll treasure.
Now, the next you mentioned kind of big pivots in the business. This sounds like kind of a totally different direction, but you decided you wanted to become the Gallup of mid-sized companies, doing kind of heavy research projects on what's driving success and failure with mid-sized companies. You were passionate about it, but it ended up ultimately kind of taking you in the wrong direction. So take us through that.
Yeah. Thanks for all these questions, John. You're helping me to like learn my own story better.
Yeah.
I had done all this work with EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and their accelerator program. So businesses 250 to 1 million, trying to grow them rapidly above 1 million. And of course, I had my own journey, and I really had a lot of like, why is this so hard? How does this work? And so much of the business stuff I was coming across was these huge companies. And it's like, well, great, whatever. Coca-Cola markets this way. What does it have to do with like a 10-person web design company in Portland, Oregon, right? And you can go through all, Southwest Airlines, Apple, whatever. And so my sort of idea was I had this partnership I built with eMyth, the famous book and a well-known coaching
Got
company.
a copy of it over here. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured it's known to our audience. Yeah, I had done a podcast with them that kind of went viral. And so then I built a relationship with them. And then I just thought, I want good to great, but for like small companies, small and mid-sized companies. So we spent 3 years. We would do an annual survey. I think we had something like 800 companies a year who filled it out, 60 different questions, detailed financials. And we really got in there with a couple friends of mine who were PhDs in entrepreneurship to really dig into the data and be like, what are the things that lead to success and failure? I still hear from people to this day who talk about how the learnings, shaped their business or influenced their career, changed their life. But the problem was by year 3, it just became really clear that, well, we had a big following and a lot of people showed up to the webinars and downloaded the report. If they really liked the material, which a lot of people did, and they liked me, they'd be like, I want to hire that guy to be my business coach or to consult. They wouldn't say like, I want to hire you to do my website. Like it's and it's the kind of thing.
And was that the ultimate goal, was to sell more websites, or was there another business model to it? Like the companies would buy the data or something?
I mean, personally, I think it was a better business model for eMyth, but that's sort of their leadership team at the time. They ultimately, I think, didn't make it work enough for them either. But yeah, I think it was, at a really basic level, there's a lot of passion, but there was a mismatch between the product and the service on PixelSpoke's end.
Got it. Because it didn't lead people to, even if they showed up for the webinars or were following the work, didn't lead them to say, now build me a website.
Yeah, I mean, why would it, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't want Jim Collins to build you a website. You want him to come in and tell you what's wrong with your strategy. So
right. It's a total different direction. Yeah. So, and then you did have kind of an epiphany, which is when you got to B Corps and got passionate about that. Tell people listening who don't know what a B Corp is and how you found that community.
Yeah. So right around that time, as that sort of strategy was failing, a friend of mine actually through EO they were the first certified B corporation in real estate, I think west of the Mississippi. And she just started telling me about it and it sounded cool. And so I got invited to an event, and that was where I first learned about certified B corporation. So basically, sometimes a little confusing. It's a certification. It's kind of like fair trade or LEED for buildings. It's a holistic certification of a business's impact. So kind of their triple bottom line, like people, planet, profit. There's different ways it's discussed, but basically saying in addition to the financial outcomes, this business is also committed to environmental and community outcomes, and you could have other buckets, workplace, and so on. And it really just felt consonant with what I had always believed. I just never was a believer in sort of the Wolf of Wall Street model of capitalism. It always felt to me like it was sort of obviously harmful, like the idea that free market taken to the extreme naturally leads to ideal outcomes for all stakeholders just struck me as nonsensical. And so the idea, but then I also felt like there was every business also wants to think they're the good guys. And so the idea of a really rigorous framework, which they have, it's a 200 plus question assessment where you can actually really know. You get a score, and it's like, and none of us are good or bad. We're all somewhere in the middle. And this allowed us to figure out where are we, benchmark it, get all these ideas for how to get better. And they also have a really amazing community around it. So it's I think that combination of a really rigorous certification and a really compelling community is unique. And that to me, it just felt like those were the people I had been looking for all along. And I don't think, I think if you don't believe this, if you don't have integrity behind this kind of way of doing business, of course it won't be a success. But I believe if you do, it's a really powerful strategy to create kind of a flywheel effect between really deeply engaging all these stakeholders, getting more engaged and more committed employees. I think we all know that most everyone who is buying, they're probably not going to buy you because you're sort of a positive impact company. But if you're in a tie and it's like, oh, these guys are doing all this good stuff for the world or their workers or whatever, you're probably going to choose the company that's doing good for the world. So I just really felt like I'd found my home, and that was a place that we wanted to be for forever.
Yeah, because you do hear people say that it is better for the bottom line when you embrace these principles, when you think about, I think it's people, planet, something else, profit, something, So did you see that when you went into this community, when you got certified as a B Corp, when you started, formalizing some of these processes to make sure that you were thinking about the planet and the people and all that kind of stuff? Did you see an impact in terms of business?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to, as you mentioned, I have a physics degree. So I'm by nature like pretty skeptical when someone is like, here's this study and, 60% of people, use this toothpaste and their businesses are more profitable. It's easy. There's so much data and everyone is selling something. Yeah. So that being said, I will sell what I believe in. Yeah, I think we immediately saw, I think what it was it's kind of like if someone says like, hey, I went to MIT, you're like, whoa, I bet he or she is pretty damn smart. I don't really know if that's relevant to the current situation, but I bet you're smart. And it's kind of like this badge of integrity with regards to impact that no amount of other things you do as a company, it's just like a shortcut to that. And so where we saw the biggest impact far and away was in recruiting. I think it helped with retention. That's a little harder to measure for sure. But we like immediately saw an uptick in the caliber of applicants. And
because people wanted to work for a company that was really focused on purpose.
Yep. Yeah. And we heard this again and again in interviews. So we knew it wasn't just like a coincidence, like really high quality candidates were, because right, most jobs.
Yeah, because who wants to work for a company that's just whatever. Yeah.
Yep. So So that was huge. And I think if you're committed to pursuing it with integrity, I think it's a very powerful strategy.
Cool. You end up selling your company to your employees in 2020. Now, you didn't leave right away. You ended up serving in CEO role beyond that, and I want to get into that. Also, the pandemic hit in 2020. What order did those happen in? Was it something you were thinking about selling your company to your employees when the pandemic happened? How did that come about?
Well, my wife and I had a child in May of 2022. So we
Throw that
thought,
in too.
like,
Throw that
we
in as
thought we
well.
just
Yeah.
kind of, do it all at once. I started thinking about it in 2017, and I met a guy actually at a B Corp conference who ran Blake Jones, the founder of Namaste Solar, a 200 plus person solar company in Colorado. And we were working together on these leadership projects. And I just had heard him mention, employee cooperative a couple times. But I was like, what is that? And so I just started chatting with him. And sort of like when I found the B Corp community, I just was like, I want to do that. That just sounded right to me. So I got really excited about it. We, of course, then immediately had our worst year in half a decade in 2018. And I just had to like put it to the
Put it
side.
on the shelf.
Yep. I mean, it was funny anyway. We ended the year in a really good position, but it's like we made half of the profits for the entire year in December. It was like we were it was weird. Anyway,
Wow.
so
we should mention that somewhere around here, you also decided to focus on credit unions too, as a vertical.
Yeah, exactly. So
Kind
I
of
mean,
glossed over that.
there's kind of this theme of getting clear on where I want to go and then just really committing until it succeeds or fails. I think a lot of times people don't stick it out long enough. But yeah, you've heard some of these things failed, some of them didn't. So credit unions, we in 2016 just went all in and said they were like maybe 10% of our revenue, but we just felt like there was alignment probably between kind of our B Corp culture and their cooperative values. And we just put 100% of our marketing efforts towards them. And it's grown to the point where today it's like 95% of our revenue. So that was a key strategy, I think, to really get the business like highly profitable and consistently, growing 20% a year. And yeah, so out of this 2017 meeting, I just felt inspired by the worker ownership thing, but I put it on the shelf. End of 2018, I told my leadership team. And then at the beginning of 2019 at the company retreat, I told the whole company, this is where we're going. And so we took the whole year kind of interviewing other employee-owned companies, lunch and learns, et cetera. We found some really good failure stories too, because like I said, everyone's selling you something, but the failure story is where you really learn. And so it was really, quite intentional and planned. Looking back, of course, it's hard not to smirk a little and say like, oh, you sold someone a company in January of 2020. But, on the one hand, obviously I had no idea there's a pandemic coming, one. And two, I'm not sure we would have done it if we would have waited another year, right? Like I think the pandemic took so much out of everyone that I'm really grateful that we got through all that work. It probably made the first year harder, but we had, we got through that big conversion and it's been really, really great for us.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about, first of all, there's we were talking beforehand about this. There are different models around employee-owned companies. There's an ESOP, there's an employee-owned cooperative, which is what you did, an employee-owned trust. And, what are some of the challenges around doing it? When you share that with the employees, did anyone say, I'm out, I'm not interested in that? Were there some people that, not everyone's an A player, right? There's some people who are like, I don't want him owning part of the company, or others are like, I want to own part of this company, but I don't want her to own part of the company. So take us through all those different challenges.
Well, that'd be a whole nother podcast, but I'll try to get you some bullet points. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like so many things as a leader, right? There's that moment of you put all this work and you unveil something, and then it's like, really, this is the reaction we get. So for sure, there were a few people who were like, "What's the catch?" And is the company failing? Are you going to quit tomorrow? And it was like, come on, like
this is a good thing.
This is a good thing. Like, good Lord. So there was some of that. We had gotten really rigorous about top grading. For sure, not everyone's an A player, but also we had a really damn good team. I will say one of the things I was really adamant about, one of the big design decisions, if you do a cooperative, which is kind of the most participatory model of employee ownership, because you have a board and you have one member, one vote. So that's really different than like an ESOP where there's a trust that's representing all the employees, but the employees aren't like voting on key strategic decisions. So I was really adamant that it had to be a 3-year qualification period before you could even apply to become a co-owner, one of the members of the cooperative, because my personal experience was that lots of people are amazing for 1 or 2 years, but until they've been at the company for 3 years or longer, and because over 3 years, you're going to have one big down in your life at least. And I think that's the moment where you really learn, is this a long-term relationship or not? So that was something I was really adamant about. You asked about kind of some of the key challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, I guess, a couple things. I was really bummed at the end of 2020. It was a really hard year. I took 3 months off for paternity leave, COVID, George Floyd's murder, employee ownership conversion. I don't know what else I'm forgetting. Oh yeah, going all remote, probably the hardest thing of everything. And I called up that several mentors who had, big successful employee-owned cooperatives, and there were a few key things I took away from that. One was this idea, probably a 5-year journey. And it was like, oh, well, if it's year 1 of a 5-year journey, probably should feel kind of hard, so that this is not a switch you flip and you're done. The second one was the idea that there's really like 5 conversions in a worker-owned cooperative that happen. There's a legal one, which is self-evident. There's a financial one. There's an operational one. Like you have to learn how to run board meetings, and it's weird because you're kind of taking one hat off and putting another one on. There's a cultural one, and that's the one we really dropped the ball on. It is just a straight up different way of thinking and being. And I think that, we should have spent the whole year investing in that. We ultimately spent a lot of 2021 in that. And then lastly, there's kind of this last conversion where we're at now, where anyone who is not an owner at PixelSpoke, they only have ever known us as a worker cooperative. So there's no old co in their mind. It's just PixelSpoke is a worker cooperative. They don't know anything different. And I think that's kind of that integration phase. So I think just those were a lot of the bumps we had along the way. Was I wasn't thinking about all 5 of those areas. I was probably too focused on the legal and the financial conversion, which is obviously really important, but it's not the whole thing.
And you continued to serve as CEO even after this process had initiated, and I think even after the transaction had completed. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is part of why I did this too. Is I had met enough, and with all due love to marketing agency owners in their 60s, I had met enough marketing agency owners in their 60s who just seemed really burnt out and misanthropic. And I just felt like I don't want to be in my 60s and running this company as the sole owner. I didn't think I had it in me. I wanted to change the ownership while I still had the energy to do it really well. So I wasn't burnt out when I sold. And the plan was always, I didn't have an exact number, but 3 to 5 years was kind of what I was targeting. And this is my life's work, right? I've put 20 years of my life into that company, 16 at the time of the sale. And I wanted to do everything I could to ensure that they're just going to absolutely thrive. And, kind of our big dream is to be a case study in, both the employee ownership and the B Corp space. And I think we have succeeded in many ways, but only if we stay a thriving business will we continue to be a case study. Otherwise, we were just kind of an interesting moment in time. And that's kind of our big why, is to inspire more companies to do these sorts of things.
Yeah. Now, what moving on to what you're focused on now, you're kind of building the next chapter around this couples working with entrepreneurial couples. What drew you to that?
Yeah. So the short version is I was in my early 30s. I had a relationship that was failing. I was known as the guy who would read any book you reference. I've read, like many of us, I've read probably 400 or 500 business books. So many of them, I probably have brain damage from it all. So many of them are just awful, awful literature, if we can even call them that. And I had this relationship that was failing. It was a couple years, that we'd been together. And I looked in the mirror, and maybe it was figurative. I can't remember if I actually looked in the mirror, but I had this moment where it was like, I have never read a book on relationships. I haven't even read a blog post on relationships. Like, what the hell, right? Like, if I say I'm looking for someone to spend the rest of my life with, why have I read 0? Even if I'm not, like, just with my level of intellectual curiosity, I should have read at least one book, right? So that kind of sent me down the path. I think it was too late to save that relationship, but I read probably 6 books and, probably very poorly self-administered some of their techniques. And then I did kind of a deeper dive after the breakup. And that was when I found the Gottman method, which for anyone who doesn't know, it's the most evidence-based method for a couple to either do kind of, therapy for severely distressed couples. But what's really cool is like coaching and improvement for couples that are average or good or mediocre, but they want to be better. And it's just got this unbelievable evidence-based background and then these incredible tools. So my wife and I have used it from, probably early on in our relationship. So that was kind of my passion for that world. And then this last summer, I had this insight that I had started leading these couples workshops, and some of my friends were like, hey, we want to come because you and your wife both have your own companies. And the way you navigate that and marriage and parenthood is inspiring. Their words, not mine. I would not call us inspiring. But, it's kind of that realization that, oh, like that's kind of the intersection of my passion for couples work and this Gottman method. And then my lived experience of like, I think we entrepreneurs bring a lot of really good things. And I think we bring a lot of challenges to a romantic relationship. So that's where I came up with this idea to interview 100 couples where one or both of them are entrepreneurs. And it's a little more of a qualitative research project than the previous one I told you about, but it's been utterly fascinating to kind of break it down into 4 types. And you can see these kinds of strengths and weaknesses that each have, and then kind of what are key tools and opportunities to strengthen those different relationships.
And are these interviews going into a book or a podcast, or are this more research interviews?
Yeah, I mean, since I literally wrapped up my last job December 20th, I haven't made as much product as I would have liked, but I've done a little under half of those 100 interviews. We are planning on launching a podcast called the Entrepreneurial Couple Podcast, and I would like to turn it into a book. That's the intention, but I imagine that's more of like a early 2025 thing, just given, kind of where I'm at with all the other projects in my life.
Cool. All right. That's great. And I look forward to seeing that when you guys, when you put that out. I want to wrap up with the last question I always ask, which is my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude, especially for those who've helped you along the way in your journey. And I'd love to hear, you've mentioned your father, you've mentioned others here, but who would you want to shout out and thank for being there with you and kind of helping you in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question because I think, as we all know, the list of people who have helped me is so long. I couldn't even, it's like, feel like it would fill, multiple books. But the person who just springs into my mind, I think he's he's still our attorney. It's this guy, Joe Durkee. He's an attorney in Portland, Oregon. Really nice, funny guy. And I'd gotten introduced to him by a friend sort of randomly. And we agreed to meet for lunch, and he had some questions about SEO for his law firm. And, I just always sort of like, sure, let's meet up. So we got together for lunch. And, I'm generally a believer when someone asks you how you're doing, that you either tell them you're doing well or you lie, that nobody is asking that question to hear all of your problems. But I was honestly so low. This was like March 2009. I just kind of said, honestly, man, I'm falling apart. And I just sort of spilled my guts to him. And part of what was going on at that point was our single biggest client had stopped paying and had started threatening us and kind of threatening legal action. And it kind of just blew my mind that I just sort of think I'm like not the kind of person who would ever get sued. Maybe that's hubris, but I think I'm sort of like like a squeaky clean guy. At least that's what I try for. And it was just devastating on every level because we needed the money. And I think like ethically, morally, I just sort of like my identity was breaking. And the more I told him about it, the more kind of like wound up he got. And he said, this is why I got into law in the first place. So, big guys can't beat up on little guys just because they've got more money and power. And he basically repped us pro bono. He did. He represented us pro bono in the entire case. It's the only time we've ever had, kind of anything remotely legal happen in the business. Never went to trial or anything like that. It just ended up being kind of like nasty grams sent back and forth. But he basically just like was the force field between me and this very aggressive company, and kind of like put them in their place and just said like, you got to pay for the work that's been done. And, you're free to go, you're free to move on if you've done that, but you can't just, beat someone up because they're smaller than you. And he refused all kind, like no matter what I did, he refused any kind of payment. So I finally made like a donation in his name to some group, but I just am eternally grateful for the, kind of like the vote of confidence in who I am as a person and the willingness to do that. as he said, it probably wasn't that hard for him, but it just meant the world to me that someone believed in me at kind of that. I mean, for sure, one of the darkest, lowest points of my life.
Yeah. Well, I am a recovering lawyer, and I can say he is a unicorn because that is unusual. You don't hear that very often. Yeah, that the lawyer just does it all pro bono. So hopefully it was a great gift. Cameron, this is great. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, my somewhat primitive website is CameronMadill.com. It's got information about the couples work I've been doing and the employee ownership work I've been doing. And then, of course, you can find I guess, I still have some ownership in it, but my company I founded at PixelSpoke.coop. They're a really amazing bunch as well.
Cameron with a C, Madill.com. Cameron, thanks so much.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate you having me.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.